On September 8, 2021, Dr. Elena Vasquez from the Centers for Disease Control received an urgent call from Granite County Hospital in Montana. A routine blood test from a remote valley community had revealed impossible results, genetic markers that shouldn't exist in the modern human genome. The Stillwater Valley, carved between the Sapphire Mountains 40 miles from the nearest town, had been home to the Thornfield community since 1887. For over a century, the 32 families living there had minimal contact with the outside world, accessible only by a treacherous mountain pass that remained snow-blocked 8 months each year. When a medical emergency forced them to seek outside help, what doctors discovered in their DNA would rewrite our understanding of genetic isolation. The blood samples showed chromosomal patterns that geneticists had only seen in computer simulations of extreme founder effects. But that was just the beginning. When the CDC's emergency response team arrived in Stillwater Valley, they found a population carrying genetic traits that had been extinct for over 10,000 years. If you think you can handle the disturbing truth behind this case, let me know in the comments. And if you want to explore more cases that authorities tried to keep hidden, subscribe now, because what we uncovered will change how you see isolated communities forever. The Stillwater Valley settlement began in 1887 when Marcus Thornfield, a former Union Army surgeon, led 32 families into the Montana wilderness seeking religious freedom and escape from what he called the moral decay of industrial society. The group, originally from various European backgrounds, including Swiss, Austrian, and German immigrants, had pooled their resources to purchase 8,000 acres of valley land, surrounded by peaks reaching 9,000 feet. The location was deliberately chosen for its inaccessibility. The single wagon trail leading in required crossing 2 rivers and navigating switchbacks that claimed several lives during the initial settlement. Thornfield, who had studied both medicine and theology, established strict rules for the community. No outside marriages without council approval, communal ownership of resources, and complete self-sufficiency. By 1900, the community had built a school, medical clinic, and meeting house, all following Thornfield's philosophy of genetic and spiritual purity. The founders practiced a unique form of Christianity mixed with Thornfield's theories about bloodline preservation, which he had developed after studying Darwin's work through his own theological lens. Census records from 1910 show the population had grown to 247 individuals, but notably, no new families had joined since the founding. The community's isolation intensified after the 1918 flu pandemic killed 18 members who had ventured out for supplies, reinforcing their belief in separation from the outside world. They developed sophisticated farming techniques, raised livestock adapted to high altitude, and maintained detailed genealogical records that Thornfield insisted were crucial for managing the community's biological destiny. By 1950, the outside world had largely forgotten Stillwater Valley existed, with maps marking the area simply as uninhabited wilderness. The investigation began when 34-year-old Samuel Thornfield, a direct descendant of the founder, was airlifted to Granite County Hospital after a farming accident severed 3 fingers. During routine pre-surgical blood work, laboratory technician Maria Santos noticed unusual results in his complete blood count. His red blood cells were 15% larger than normal, and his white blood cell differential showed types that didn't match any known patterns. Dr. James Mitchell, the hospital's chief of internal medicine with 20 years of experience in rural healthcare, ordered genetic testing, suspecting a rare blood disorder. What came back stunned the medical team. Samuel's DNA showed a heterozygosity level of only 0.23, comparable to isolated Pacific Island populations, despite being of European descent. More mysteriously, he carried active gene variants that geneticists believed had been selected out of European populations during the Neolithic period. The CDC was immediately notified, and Dr. Elena Vasquez, a specialist in genetic epidemiology who had studied isolated populations in the Amazon, assembled a response team. Their September 15th arrival in Stillwater Valley required a helicopter flight, as early snow had already blocked the mountain pass. The team found a community of 412 people living in conditions that seemed frozen in the 1920s. No electricity from the grid, no modern vehicles, but surprisingly sophisticated agricultural and medical practices. The population appeared healthy but unusual. Nearly all adults were over 6 feet tall, with distinctive pale blue eyes showing a unique crystalline pattern and remarkably similar facial features despite supposedly representing 32 original families. Initial interviews revealed that the community maintained detailed health records going back to 1887, including what they called breeding charts that tracked genetic lines with scientific precision. Elder Council member Ruth Thornfield, 78, explained that their founder had been guided by divine wisdom to preserve humanity's original genetic gifts. The medical team collected blood samples from volunteers, promising to help with any health issues discovered, while privately suspecting they had stumbled upon something unprecedented. The genetic analysis conducted at the CDC's Advanced Laboratory in Atlanta revealed findings that Dr. Vasquez called scientifically impossible, yet undeniably real. The Stillwater Valley population carried active Neanderthal gene variants at 4.8% of their genome, double the highest percentage found in any modern population. More shocking was the discovery of Denisovan DNA segments that were not just present, but actively expressed, affecting everything from altitude adaptation to immune function. The community's average consanguinity coefficient was 0.156, indicating systematic inbreeding over 5 generations, yet they showed none of the typical negative effects. Instead, the population had somehow achieved what geneticists call purging of deleterious alleles. Harmful recessive genes had been eliminated through selective pressure. Dr. Robert Chen, a computational biologist from Harvard, identified the mechanism. The community's detailed genealogical records weren't just family trees, but sophisticated genetic management systems. Marcus Thornfield had somehow intuited principles of population genetics decades before they were scientifically understood, using his medical knowledge to track inherited traits and guide marriage arrangements to minimize harmful pairings while maximizing beneficial traits. The records, written in a combination of English, Latin, and a symbolic system Thornfield had developed, documented every birth, death, illness, and marriage since 1887. They revealed that the community had practiced not just selective breeding, but actual genetic selection. Individuals with certain traits were encouraged to have more children, while others were subtly discouraged or redirected to non-reproductive roles. The most disturbing discovery came from mitochondrial DNA analysis. The entire population descended from only 8 female lineages and 5 male lineages, despite starting with 32 families. The records showed that many original settlers had died mysteriously in the first decade, always those who failed to adapt to the valley's spiritual demands. Dr. Vasquez's team found evidence of infanticide in the early years, with records indicating that babies with certain physical characteristics were returned to God within days of birth. The community had essentially conducted a century-long experiment in human selective breeding, guided by Marcus Thornfield's fusion of primitive eugenics, religious mysticism, and surprisingly accurate genetic intuition. The result was a population carrying ancient genetic variants that had been preserved and concentrated through controlled reproduction, creating humans with capabilities that mainstream populations had lost millennia ago. Deeper genealogical investigation revealed that Marcus Thornfield had been far more than a Civil War surgeon. Records from Harvard Medical School showed he had been expelled in 1884 for conducting unauthorized experiments on patients, attempting to prove his theories about hereditary vitality. His personal journals, discovered in the community's archive, revealed an obsession with the works of Francis Galton and early eugenics theories, combined with mystical beliefs about recovering humanity's pre-diluvian perfection. The original 32 families hadn't been random religious seekers, but carefully selected based on specific physical and mental traits Thornfield believed represented pure European stock. He had recruited them through a network of correspondence, promising a utopia where their children would become the seed of a new humanity. The selection process had taken him 3 years, traveling across the Midwest, examining families like livestock, measuring skull dimensions, documenting eye color variations, and tracing genealogies to ensure no contamination from what he considered inferior bloodlines. By 1895, the community had fully embraced Thornfield's vision. His son, Marcus Jr., had continued the work after his father's death in 1923, adding new layers of sophistication, including mandatory genetic counseling before marriages and a point system rating genetic desirability. Resistance had occurred but was systematically suppressed. Journal entries from 1934 described the cleansing of the Morrison family after they attempted to leave with their children, claiming the community had become a prison of blood. The 15 family members had died in what was officially recorded as a typhoid outbreak, though no other families were affected. The third generation, led by current elder Thomas Thornfield, had modernized the system using genetics textbooks smuggled in during the 1970s. They had incorporated actual scientific knowledge into their breeding program, though filtered through their grandfather's original mystical framework. Women's journals revealed the human cost, forced marriages at 16, pressure to produce at least 8 children, and social exile for those who failed to conceive. Yet many expressed pride in their genetic duty and genuinely believed they were preserving something sacred. The genetic analysis revealed extraordinary adaptations in the Stillwater Valley population. Their hemoglobin showed a variant similar to that found in Tibetan populations, but more efficient, allowing oxygen saturation of 98% at altitudes where most people would experience severe hypoxia. This trait came from activated Denisovan genes EPAS1 and EGLN1, which had somehow been preserved and concentrated through the community's breeding program. Dr. Sarah Kim from the National Institute of Health discovered that the population's immune systems were fundamentally different. They possessed active versions of archaic immune genes that provided resistance to bacterial infections that devastate normal populations but left them potentially vulnerable to certain modern viruses they'd never encountered. Their larger red blood cells, initially noticed in Samuel Thornfield, were caused by a Neanderthal variant of the ANK1 gene that increased cellular oxygen capacity by 20%. The population also showed unusual metabolic adaptations. They required 30% fewer calories than standard calculations would suggest, yet maintained greater muscle mass and bone density than average Americans. Their telomeres, the protective caps on chromosomes that shorten with age, showed minimal degradation even in elderly individuals, suggesting potential lifespans exceeding 100 years. Most remarkably, the community showed cognitive differences linked to archaic genes. Brain scans revealed increased density in regions associated with spatial navigation and long-term memory, traits that would have been advantageous for prehistoric humans but had been selected against in agricultural societies. However, they showed decreased activity in areas associated with abstract reasoning and symbolic thinking, potentially explaining their isolation from modern society. The genetic bottleneck had also fixed several harmful recessive traits in the population. Every member carried genes for phenylketonuria, requiring careful dietary management, and 60% had a form of color blindness affecting red-green distinction. The community had unconsciously adapted their diet and lifestyle to accommodate these limitations, creating what Dr. Kim called a parallel evolutionary path that diverged from mainstream humanity while retaining prehistoric advantages. The legal implications of the Stillwater Valley discovery created unprecedented challenges for authorities. While the historical records clearly showed evidence of murder, forced marriages, and child abuse, most perpetrators were long dead. Current elder Thomas Thornfield and the Community Council faced potential charges for continuing practices that violated modern laws regarding consent and child welfare. However, Montana State Attorney General Patricia Williams faced a complex situation. The community members genuinely believed they were following religious practices, and many victims didn't consider themselves victims. After extensive consultation with federal authorities, a compromise was reached. No criminal charges would be filed for historical crimes, but the community would be required to comply with modern law going forward. This meant ending arranged marriages for minors, allowing free movement in and out of the valley, and submitting to regular welfare checks by state authorities. The community's children would be required to receive state-approved education, though accommodation was made for their unique cultural practices. Federal Judge Margaret Chen ruled that while the community's practices were deeply troubling from a modern ethical standpoint, prosecuting them would essentially criminalize an entire culture. Instead, she mandated the establishment of an oversight committee, including community members and state officials, to ensure gradual integration with modern standards while respecting religious freedom. The genetic data posed additional legal challenges. The National Institutes of Health sought to study the population's unique genome, but this raised questions about genetic privacy and exploitation. The community, advised by civil rights attorneys, negotiated an agreement where they would participate in research in exchange for medical support and guarantees that no genetic material would be used for commercial purposes. The case prompted Montana to pass legislation requiring genetic counseling for isolated communities and mandatory reporting of suspected genetic abuse. The Stillwater Valley Genetic Heritage Protection Act became a model for other states dealing with isolated populations. The integration of Stillwater Valley into modern society required careful management to avoid cultural destruction while protecting vulnerable members. Dr. Jennifer Rodriguez, a specialist in community psychology, led a team that established a transition center in Phillipsburg, the nearest town. The center provided education about modern life for community members who chose to leave, while also serving as a cultural bridge for those who remained. Younger community members showed the most interest in outside integration. 23 individuals aged 18 to 25 enrolled in online education programs, though their unique cognitive patterns required specialized teaching methods. Sarah Thornfield, 22, became the first community member to attend university, studying genetics at Montana State University. She described the experience as learning that everything I believed about being special was both true and a lie. The community's children required extensive support to develop social skills for interacting with outsiders. Their isolated upbringing had created what psychologists called cultural autism, difficulty understanding social cues and norms from mainstream society. Specialized therapy programs helped them adapt while maintaining their cultural identity. Medical integration proved complex. The population's unique genetics meant standard medical treatments often didn't work as expected. Dr. Mitchell established a specialized clinic serving the community, developing modified treatment protocols accounting for their genetic variations. The discovery of their extended lifespans and disease resistances attracted global medical interest, leading to ethical debates about studying the population. The community itself split into three factions: traditionalists who wanted complete isolation restored, modernizers seeking full integration, and a middle group attempting to preserve their genetic heritage while accepting modern values. The council established new marriage guidelines allowing outside partners but requiring genetic counseling to understand the implications. Support groups formed for women dealing with trauma from forced breeding practices, though many struggled to reconcile their experiences with their continued belief in their community's special purpose. 5 years after discovery, the community had stabilized at 385 members, with some leaving for outside life, while others, attracted by the unique genetic heritage, had married in after extensive screening and counseling. The Stillwater Valley discovery fundamentally challenged assumptions about genetic diversity, isolated communities, and bioethics in the 21st century. It demonstrated that significant human genetic variation could be hidden in plain sight, raising questions about how many other isolated populations might carry extinct or rare genetic traits. The case sparked intense debate about the ethics of genetic isolation and selective breeding, even when conducted for religious reasons. Dr. Michael Foster from the Hastings Center for Bioethics argued that while the community's practices were abhorrent by modern standards, their unintentional preservation of archaic genes might prove invaluable for medical research. The discovery influenced policy discussions about genetic privacy and indigenous rights. If the Stillwater Valley population constituted a genetically distinct group, did they deserve protection similar to indigenous peoples? The United Nations Human Rights Committee began developing new frameworks for protecting genetically isolated populations while ensuring individual rights. The medical implications were staggering. The community's disease resistances and longevity genes offered potential treatments for age-related conditions and infectious diseases. However, extracting this knowledge while respecting the community's autonomy proved challenging. Pharmaceutical companies attempted to gain access to genetic samples, leading to legal battles over genetic patrimony. The case revealed systemic failures in monitoring isolated communities. Despite existing in Montana for over 130 years, Stillwater Valley had avoided all oversight through geographic isolation and bureaucratic blindness. This prompted nationwide reviews of remote area monitoring and child welfare in religious communities. Educational implications emerged as universities developed new curricula addressing genetic isolation, founder effects, and the ethics of human genetic variation. The Stillwater Valley case became a standard study in genetics, anthropology, and bioethics courses. The discovery also raised uncomfortable questions about human evolution and genetic enhancement. If isolated communities could maintain beneficial archaic genes through selective breeding, what did this mean for humanity's genetic future? The Stillwater Valley revelation forever changed our understanding of human genetic potential and the dark price of preserving it. As community member Sarah Thornfield testified to Congress, "We are living proof that humanity's past isn't truly past. It lives in our blood, for better and worse." Her words remind us that genetic heritage carries both gifts and burdens that echo across generations. If you watched until here, it means you truly care about uncovering these hidden truths. Comment, "I watched until here, so I can recognize the real followers who aren't afraid of difficult realities." Don't forget to like this video if you believe these stories need to be told, and share it with people who value investigative content. Subscribe now for more cases that authorities hoped would stay buried forever.